Back in the 1990s, I worked as a police officer in a small, quiet town named Stillwater. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and crime was practically non-existent. My job mostly involved mundane tasks, like helping find a lost pet, checking on the occasional suspicious car, or making sure the high school kids didn't loiter too long outside the local diner. I didn't mind it though. The peace was comforting, and I thought I'd seen everything the town had to offer. But one cold October night proved me wrong. The air that night carried the sharp bite of fall, and the moon hung low and full, casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. I was patrolling the outskirts of town, a place where Stillwater's modest homes gave way to fields and dense clusters of trees. The roads were quiet, the kind of stillness that felt almost unnatural, as though the world was holding its breath. I was driving along Maple Street when something unusual caught my eye. The back door of the old Jensen house was wide open. That house had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. Ever since old Mrs. Jensen passed away, the townsfolk avoided it, claiming it had a bad aura about it. Kids dared each other to get close to it, but none ever stayed long. So, seeing that door ajar sent an immediate chill down my spine. I pulled my patrol car to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, staring at the dark silhouette of the house. I told myself it was probably nothing, a loose hinge, maybe a strong gust of wind. But as a police officer, I couldn't just drive away. If someone was trespassing or in trouble, I had to check it out. Reluctantly, I stepped out of the car, grabbed my flashlight, and started toward the house. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my boots. The air felt heavier the closer I got, and for reasons I couldn't explain, my skin prickled with unease. Then I heard it, the faint sound of children laughing. I froze in my tracks, gripping my flashlight tighter. Laughter, high-pitched and carefree, echoed from inside the house. It wasn't just laughter, though. I could also hear the unmistakable sound of a ball bouncing rhythmically. The noises didn't make any sense. The Jensen house had been abandoned for years. There were no children in that neighborhood, especially not at this hour. For a moment, I considered turning back, but something inside me pushed me forward. Maybe it was my sense of duty, or maybe it was just plain curiosity. I couldn't leave without knowing what was going on. I stepped through the open door and into the house. The air inside was cold and damp, thick with the smell of mold and rotting wood. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rooms that looked like they had been frozen in time. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and old furniture sat shrouded in dust. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. "Is anyone here?" No response. The laughter continued, faint but distinct, pulling me further into the house. I moved cautiously, stepping over broken floorboards and discarded belongings. In the kitchen, I noticed a set of plates still sitting in the sink, as though someone had left in a hurry and never returned. The sounds grew louder as I moved deeper inside. They seemed to be coming from upstairs now. I hesitated at the base of the staircase, staring up into the shadows. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see this through. As I climbed the creaking stairs, the noises suddenly stopped. The silence was oppressive, as though the house itself were holding its breath. At the top of the stairs, I swept my flashlight across the hallway. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the doors to the rooms were all slightly ajar. Then I saw it. A single piece of paper lay on the floor in the middle of the hallway. It looked old, yellowed with age, and frayed at the edges. I bent down and picked it up, and as the beam of my flashlight illuminated the page, my blood ran cold. It was a torn page from a children's book. But what stopped me in my tracks was the drawing on it. It showed a police officer, a figure that looked exactly like me. The details were uncanny, right down to my badge number. My hands trembled as I stared at the page. How was this possible? The sound of laughter erupted again, this time louder and closer, as though the children were standing right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the hallway, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't wait to find out what was happening. Clutching the paper in one hand, I bolted down the stairs, my boots thundering against the wooden steps. The laughter followed me, echoing through the house, growing louder and more distorted. By the time I reached the back door, it felt like the walls were closing in. I didn't stop running until I was back in my patrol car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 2 tries to start the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood there, dark and silent once more, as though nothing had happened. When I got back to the station, I told my partner about the incident. He chuckled, chalking it up to my imagination or a prank by local kids. But I knew better. The drawing on that page was no coincidence. To this day, I've never gone back to that house. I've warned others to stay away, but there's always someone curious enough to ignore the warnings. If you ever find yourself in Stillwater, take my advice. Avoid the Jensen house. Some doors are meant to stay closed, no matter how tempting it is to look inside. I saw her again the first time I saw her. She was standing near the truck, staring at it with an expression so sad it made my chest ache. At first, I thought she was lost, a young woman with hollow eyes and shoulders weighed down by something I couldn't see. But before I could reach her, she disappeared like a wisp of smoke. It had been days since that encounter, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something haunting in her eyes, a story untold. When I saw her again, standing in the same spot by the truck, I didn't hesitate. "Mary," I called, rushing outside. The name slipped from my lips without thinking. I didn't know her name then, but it felt right. She turned slowly, her form shimmering faintly in the moonlight. This time, she didn't vanish. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and tears streaked down her cheeks. "I'm so lonely," she whispered, her voice fragile and broken. "I can't find peace." My breath caught. "Why are you still here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What can I do to help you?" She looked at the house, then back at me. "My family moved away after I died," she said, her voice trembling. "I never got to say goodbye. I've been waiting for them all this time." Her words hit me like a cold wave. The thought of her wandering, lost and alone, for years was unbearable. "Mary," I said gently, taking a cautious step closer. "Your family is long gone, but that doesn't mean you have to stay. Maybe it's time to let go and find peace." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try." As she spoke, her form began to fade. It wasn't sudden, it was gradual, like morning mist dissolving under the sun. I stood there, watching until there was nothing left but the cool night air and the sound of my own heartbeat. I spent the next day finishing the truck's paint job, trying to distract myself from the strange encounter. The vibrant red paint gleamed in the sunlight, but my mind kept wandering back to Mary. Had she truly moved on? Was she finally at peace? As I cleaned up my supplies, I noticed something odd on the porch. A small bouquet of flowers lay there, delicate white lilies tied with a simple ribbon. I hadn't put them there, and I was certain no one else had been by. Curious, I picked them up. A folded note was tucked beneath the ribbon. In neat, flowing handwriting, it read, "Thank you." My chest tightened as I read the words. A smile broke across my face, bittersweet and full of relief. Mary had finally found her peace, and in helping her, I found mine. The ghost of Bob Jones Millfield is a quiet little town, the kind of place where everyone knows your name your business, and your secrets. People don't come to Millfield for excitement. They come for its steady, unchanging rhythm. Bob Jones was a fixture in that rhythm. As the town's only reporter, he had a knack for digging up stories no one wanted told. But what made Bob truly unforgettable was his annoying habit of flicking people's ears to get their attention. I remember the first time it happened to me. I was at the diner, lost in thought, when a sharp flick startled me. I turned to see Bob grinning like a kid who'd just pulled off a prank. "Got a minute?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before launching into his questions. As irritating as he was, Bob was part of Millfield's fabric. So when news broke that he had passed away from lung cancer, the entire town felt the loss. His funeral was packed, with people sharing stories about his quirks, his dedication to reporting, and, of course, his infamous ear flicks. Life went on, or so we thought. It started with Tim, the baker. He swore he saw Bob standing at the scene of a car accident on Elm Street. He was just watching, Tim said, his voice uneasy. I laughed it off, assuming Tim had been working too hard. But then Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, claimed she saw Bob the night the library caught fire. "He was standing outside," she whispered, her face pale, just staring at the flames. More stories followed. Jenny from the diner saw him at the scene of a robbery. A farmer swore he saw Bob wandering the fields at dusk. It wasn't long before the whole town was buzzing about Bob's ghost. At first, the police dismissed the sightings, but everything changed when Officer Daniels had his encounter. Daniels was a skeptic, the kind of man who scoffed at ghost stories. But one late night, as he brushed his teeth, he felt a sudden chill. Looking up into the mirror, he froze. Behind him, Bob's pale face stared back. Daniels spun around, but the room was empty. His heart pounded as he tried to shake it off. Then he felt a sharp flick on his ear. The tough officer bolted from the bathroom, his skepticism shattered. The story spread quickly, and the town's unease grew. As the weeks passed, Bob's ghost appeared more frequently and more disturbingly. His once familiar face began to decay, his clothes tattered and stained. It was as if his spirit was rotting alongside his buried body. The night I saw him is burned into my memory. I was driving home late, the road shrouded in fog. Turning a corner, my headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Bob. His gaunt face was twisted, his hollow eyes fixed on me. His mouth moved, as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Frozen, I could only stare. Then, suddenly, I felt a flick on my ear. A scream tore from my throat as I hit the gas, swerving around his ghostly figure and speeding home. I locked every door and didn't sleep a second that night. The next morning, I shared my experience with Sarah, a close friend. She confessed she'd felt the flick days earlier. "It's like he's trying to tell us something," she said, her voice shaky. We couldn't figure out what Bob wanted, but one thing was clear: his presence wasn't fading. Over time, the town adjusted to its haunted reality. Bob's ghost became a fact of life, his flicks an eerie reminder of his past habit. Some believed he was seeking redemption, others thought he was trapped, unable to let go. Even now, whenever my ear itches, I can't help but shiver. It's a subtle, chilling reminder that Bob is still out there, watching. His ghostly presence has become part of Millfield's identity, a permanent mark left by the man who refused to fade away. And as long as we feel that faint flick, we'll never forget him.